Hey, everybody, it's Tabatha Bird Weaver here. I just wanted to let you know that in this episode, we're going to unpack developmental trauma, neurodivergent trauma, and how to tell the difference between them. It's a episode worth watching. Welcome back, everybody, to the CPTSD podcast. I'm so excited you're here. As always, please remember to save, like, and share, subscribe, because that helps this free information travel far in this world, and that's what we're looking for. I'm joined today with my colleague, Ace Whitman, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Illinois. Pronouns are they, them, and we're going to be talking today about the impact of developmental trauma and neurodiversity and what that might look like throughout your healing journey. And Ace, I don't know about your For You page on TikTok, but mine is crawling with information about neurodiversity, how to know if you have ADHD or ADHD or autism or any type of diversity and trauma at the same time. So I'm hoping that you'll introduce us a little bit to yourself and to why you're interested in this topic. And then I know we're going to have a great conversation.
I love that you opened up with talking about TikTok because that's exactly where I started understanding my own autism and my own ADHD and other neurodiversities. And I love how I was thinking about this last night, how there has been a parallel between the grassroots movement of education about neurodiversity with the grassroots movement of education about trauma and trauma recovery. And I don't think it's coincidental that the two of them are both becoming really big topics in the social media, especially around TikTok. I like TikTok isn't great for my brain as far as I don't sit there and scroll for hours, but every time I'm on it, I seriously love the information that I'm seeing and hearing and can relate to it so much better than what all of the professionals documents and materials present. It's so much more relatable when it's coming from people who are experiencing the symptoms.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I think and I might get in trouble here, but I think that the diagnoses might actually be more accurate when we're starting with a self-diagnosis because of a couple things. First of all,
Mhm.
who knows us better than us,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Versus, I mean, people
Absolutely.
know how we present, but that doesn't mean they know what's going on inside. But the other thing is, all the diagnostic criteria for all mental health disorders has a very narrow window of who has been studied over what amount of time.
Right, absolutely. Predominantly white, predominantly cis male, predominantly middle class. There's so much, so many limitations to what we have studied and what we know about these things. And we live and work in a system that is very much rooted in white supremacy and misogyny, and so that comes out for sure within the diagnostic standards of the therapeutic world.
Oh my gosh, yes. And just the privilege of being able to get a diagnosis.
Right,
I
right.
mean, yeah,
And not everybody really wants a diagnose, like an official diagnosis,
right.
because what harm could that lead to in a system that operates from a place of ableism and those other things, misogyny and white supremacy? It, I don't know that getting an official diagnosis is going to solve any problems. Um,
I totally agree, except in the case where, for example, some people with autism and ADHD have very high support needs.
uh-huh.
That is when a diagnosis is helpful because there's money attached to it.
Yes, I
Otherwise,
agree.
I actually find diagnoses in general to be more harmful than helpful, except in some cases.
Hmm. I
So,
agree. I agree. It should be limited to when we need resources related to those and accommodations related to those struggles. But so much of the way that the system operates is that we give somebody a diagnosis, and then they are labeled that way as if they are broken, as if there is something wrong with them, when in reality, so much of the case of the struggles that they're experiencing are related to um, difficulties in navigating a society that is ableist.
Yeah. And many other ists as well,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And the bottom line is diagnoses in the United States, and I'm not sure worldwide, but in the United States, diagnoses are intimately tied to insurance companies, which should not be deciding about your care. But we are getting off topic.
Yes, we are.
I am already seeing that we may need to have another conversation in the future about many things.
I
I
could talk all day long.
Same. And I love that we love the same stuff. So I hear the passion, and I hear from you and just the way you're thinking and talking about this, that you and I agree it's time to overhaul the system.
Yep,
Um,
for
and
sure.
until that's done, we also have to figure out how to operate within it because
Mhm.
it's still here.
Right,
It's
right.
still here. And
It's
so,
here, and it presents with limitations and barriers, and oftentimes causes harm. And so like we have to figure out how to work within the system, um, while also like one of the big things that I'm working towards is in my business and my practice is trying to step away from the system as much as possible and kind of doing my own thing.
yeah, and you're not alone. I mean, there is definitely a trend in that. So I just was going to go off on another tangent there, but I want to focus this back in because the topic we're talking about today is really important, and it's
Mhm.
really dynamic and current because, like you were saying, many people are realizing, holy crud, I think I'm neurodivergent somehow, some neurospicy flavor,
Right.
because the gatekeeping around information about what that looks like has shifted to the community.
Yes. Yes, and I
And
love it so much.
me too. Me too. And I think it's really going to help us break down the very system we were just complaining about. But in the
Mhm.
meantime, I
Mhm.
hear the passion in you, and I would love to know
Mhm.
what sparked that in you to understand developmental trauma as well as neurospicy trauma. How did you
Mhm.
come into this path?
So I was already working as a therapist. I went down this career path, went to school, got a master's degree, all of that, right? Trying to muddle my way through life, as a helper, as somebody who is making a positive impact in the world around us. And eventually, like really found myself really struggling to work in the systems that were in place, both professionally and personally. Like it was not working for me, until I realized that I had experienced throughout my entire life developmental and complex trauma, and I had normalized it, and in my mind everything that I had experienced growing up was normal, and
Mhm.
it wasn't that bad, right? And it wasn't the stereotypical, like I wasn't beat growing up, like. And so in my mind, I didn't realize that the experiences and the ways in which I struggled was related to those experiences of developmental trauma, until I really started leaning into and exploring what it meant to experience trauma and what that actually looked like and felt like. And so I started specializing in it, because I related so deeply with it, and I found my own trauma recovery journey leading the way to how I help other clients through their trauma recovery journey. And then with the neurospicy piece of things, that's been a newer thing for me. Something that I I've always struggled in a lot of ways, and blamed most of that on the trauma. And then over the last handful of years, as I have recovered from my experiences in childhood, and my trauma symptoms started to fade away, it became more and more clear to me that not all of my struggles were related directly to the trauma, but that a lot of the struggles that I was experiencing were because I was trying to fit in to a neurotypical world, or a world that expected me to be neurotypical.
Yeah.
And that that led to me, in combination with my trauma response of needing to appear perfect and needing to present well put together, because I was too insecure to like admit to myself that I was struggling in pretty much every aspect of my life. And I certainly wasn't communicating that with other people. I wasn't even
Mm.
admit it to myself. But as I started to look at that deeper and started to really be honest with myself about my struggles, it became really apparent to me that, oh, I have been struggling with neurodiversity my entire life as well, in addition to the complex trauma.
Yeah, and that's a 1-2 knockout, isn't it? I mean, we have a similar story there. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it would be helpful, and I think it would, for us to back up just a second
Okay.
because our audience may not have listened to every single episode up until this point. This could be the
Okay.
first one. So let's just take a minute between the two of us and talk about developmental trauma and what that is,
Okay.
and the overlap with complex trauma, because they are two different things.
Hmm.
And then we'll get into the more neurospicy pieces and how to pull those apart, because one of the
Hmm.
things I'm seeing again on TikTok is
Uh-huh.
people, and I get questions too, people saying, how do I pull those apart? Right.
It's
And
it's complicated. It is tough.
and that's the C that we're all talking about, is the complex.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So let me start us off with just a summary of developmental trauma.
Okay.
When we say developmental trauma in the clinical field, typically we're talking about children up through their latent phase, meaning through 18 for certain. And now that we know brain development doesn't really stop until 25, I would extend that. But primarily we're talking about kids who are 13 and under,
Hmm.
right? Where there are very fast developmental stages that we're going through and needing to learn how to be ourselves in those stages. And when
Hmm.
we are impacted with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, as I talk a lot about on this,
Hmm.
I just got the connection with you. As I talk a
I
lot about,
I
go
was just
ahead.
gonna say that I named my business Aces for a reason.
It's perfect. ACEs recovery is exactly what we're talking about. So, what adverse
Uh-huh.
childhood events or experiences are things that could be traumatic to a child. So,
Hmm.
for example, let's just use one, which is frequent moving.
Okay.
Okay, that's like I think the least stressful thing on that list to talk about. If,
Probably.
right, one child can move frequently,
Uh-huh.
and if they're in a supportive environment and a supportive family, it may not impact them at all
Hmm.
or that much.
Right.
Another who moves frequently and has no support or
Hmm.
is actually being harmed in the process, that could end up being something that is detrimental,
Right.
right?
Because it's not really about the experience, it's about how our body reacts to the experience and our
Yes,
ability to self-regulate through that experience. And if we're not able to self-regulate through the moves, it's like our body can't recover, our nervous system can't recover from those experiences, and we continue to experience the symptoms of trauma as a
right,
result.
right. And as kids, we're not supposed to know how to regulate everything. And that's where the caregiver and the community comes in.
Hmm.
Does that make
Correct.
sense? Like, that's what we're
Yeah.
learning to regulate. And so
Right.
those traumas, they can stack on
Yep.
each other. And that's
Yep.
what makes it complex.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I often describe the complex piece of it is before you have the opportunity for your nervous system to regulate again, like, because we've got the sympathetic and we got the parasympathetic nervous system. If we're like regulated, they're nice and balanced. We got enough of both. But if we're in a trauma response, either our sympathetic nervous system is heavily activated and we go into a fight or flight response, or our parasympathetic nervous system is heavily activated and we go into a freeze response and shut down.
Mhm.
And we like to touch on the piece about like community and the people around us, like as we're developing, we don't have the ability to just naturally instinctively know how to regulate our nervous system. We have to have people in our lives, caregivers, who are attuned to us, who are aware of what we're experiencing when we're experiencing it, who also have a regulated nervous system so that we can co-regulate with them. We can parallel their process of regulation. And, a major piece of the developmental process is caretakers teaching us how to recognize what it is that we're experiencing on a physiological level, and then do the skills like a caretaker who's attuned to their child, who's upset, who's in distress. They'll pick them up, they'll pat their backs, they'll rock them or bounce them or talk soothingly. Like, those are all things that teach us how to self-regulate.
Mhm.
And without that, we have like practically no chance of learning how to do it on our own during that developmental stage.
Right. And I just want to speak to our audience directly and say, I agree totally with everything you just said. And it's not our fault that we didn't know how to do that.
Right.
So,
Right.
and one of the problems though is that we end up being shameful, feeling ashamed that we don't know how to do these things.
Hmm.
And there's another problem, just to be a really happy presenter today. And that is when those traumas are happening, let's say 7 and below.
Uh-huh.
Okay, you're making decisions neurologically and in your mind about what to expect in relationship. And so that sets us up for all of the attachment language type stuff, which
Hmm.
is also all over TikTok right now, anxious avoidant attachment type styles. My point here is that neurological damage is done when we have trauma in childhood.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I heard you saying at the beginning is once you started healing from those specific damage points that you could identify, you
Hmm.
started realizing there was more to your distress than just developmental trauma, as if that
Right.
weren't enough.
Right.
Right. So have you,
It's
I
really
mean,
amazing. Anybody who has both in combination, like who can somehow manage to muddle through life, like it's just it speaks volumes for like tenacity and like willingness to keep like pushing forward, because it ain't easy.
mm-mm,
It is not easy trying
mm-mm.
to navigate life with those experiences of the complex trauma, the developmental trauma, um of the neurodivergence. Like, all of it makes it so hard to work, like to just move through life without any, like, when you don't, especially when you don't know what's happening, when you
Mm-hmm.
have like no awareness of why you're struggling, and like everyone around you is telling you that you're just being lazy or that you're not smart enough, or like, I mean, I got blonde, ditzy, like like all of those stereotypes. And yeah, because I was smart and did really well in school, it was completely dismissed as as an option that I might be neurodivergent, despite the fact that I literally got held back in kindergarten because I didn't talk. Like, literally experienced select mutism at school, and yet because I was smart, it somehow got missed through my entire life.
Totally. And I think that for our ADHDers out there in particular, that can be a real issue because you can be like me. I'm pretty darn smart too, highly intelligent. It's not a thinking problem or a learning problem, it's a doing problem. Right. And
Hmm.
so,
Hmm.
and if you don't understand the disconnect there, like somebody outside of you doesn't understand it, especially because what we define as ADHD isn't really 100% accurate.
I
Right.
would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And it's going to go back to primarily who's been studied is little white boys. And I want
Hmm.
little white boys to have the support that they need too, but there are
Hmm.
more ways that ADHD shows up than the
Yeah.
typical what we expect. Same with autism. We have a lot of high need people with autism that deserve support, but we automatically think of them as what autism looks like.
Hmm.
And that's not
Hmm.
necessarily true either.
Hmm.
And I think
Right.
that if we clarify those things, more support will go where it needs to go and appropriate support will be
Yes.
available.
Yes. And I think also, in addition to support, just like information and knowledge, and like, so much, my life has gotten so much better since I started realizing that many of my struggles throughout life have been related to neurodivergence because now I can like pinpoint where the struggle is happening and go, oh, this is what's happening right now. And now because I know what's happening as it's happening, I can like figure out the best way to navigate through that or around that.
Yeah, information is crucial, which is why I'm going to keep making this podcast because we really need that information to be shared. Again, going back to self-diagnosis,
Hmm.
right? Or self-understanding, I think is a more appropriate way to look at that.
Yeah,
So we've
I love
talked
it.
a little bit about what developmental trauma is, and I want to add the neurodevelopmental piece that research shows us that kids who are neurodevelopmentally different also experience more trauma. And that's already what we've been talking about, that we experience trauma because we don't fit
Hmm.
into the traditional systems that are acceptable in our
Hmm.
society. And again, we're coming in with shame,
Yep.
right? What's your experience been specifically? Like, what kinds of traumas have you noticed because of the neurodiverse piece?
Um, I think the social piece has probably been the biggest difficulty
Mhm.
for me in overcoming, especially as somebody who went the route of like getting a master's degree and entering into the professional world. There were so many expectations that I present a certain way and I interact in a certain way. And that just is not me. It's just not. I don't want it, and I don't want to look professional or sound professional or like to me that's fake. That like professional is equivalent to um white, straight, cis, fairly wealthy expectations of society. And like that is just, it's not me, it's not real, it's not authentic. And so I was consumed with how I was different from everyone else and why, and I couldn't figure out why people didn't like me. I couldn't figure out why I struggled in making these like building and sustaining healthy relationships. And I think in addition to the symptoms from the trauma, the neurodiversity added another level of complexity because I don't read like social cues very well. As a queer person, I actively like avoid, like actively reject societal expectations of me, and I've had to work through that piece of things to come to a space where I loved being queer and loved like existing as myself. But as far as the neurodiversity piece of it causing struggle, like I never felt like I belonged, never felt like I fit in, especially within the professional worlds. I actually I had a peer at one point like tell me that that okay, I'm gonna say the F bomb here, because it needs to come out here.
It's effing
Um,
okay.
like told me at one point, this was probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, really early into my like just touching in, actually maybe even was the piece that pushed me into diving into my trauma recovery a little bit. So this peer who was also a counselor told me that my mother must have really in childhood and that I must be autistic or something. And it turns out that both are true, but the way that she was saying it was as if there was something wrong with me,
Yeah.
as if that like that the conflict between she and I was rooted in my stuff, when in reality, my how I experience the world and how I navigate the world is just very different from the way she does it, and was like uh incredibly like judgmental of how she perceived that, and how she communicated that with me, and that was like pretty consistent with how a lot of peers in the community in the counseling field have treated me.
Ouch. I'm
Yeah.
really sad and sorry to hear that. And I have observed and had similar experiences. our field needs help. We're dying.
Oh my God. They're stuck in an antiquated old systems of operating that are just really harmful, that are
Yeah.
really harmful and
Yeah.
also not helpful at all.
Really not. And I mean, I think when I look back on my own career, there are two things that I've always heard from most clients, and I really do mean most. One is, I never thought about it like that. And I think there's the plus of neurodiversity
Hmm.
because we're not in the box, we're
Right.
out the box,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so tons of different more approaches, right? And
Uh-huh.
the other is, I've never had a therapist work with me like you. And
Mhm.
I know that's true. And I know why it's true. And do
Uh-huh.
you mind if I just talk about that for a minute?
Yeah,
Because I'm
absolutely.
all right, I'm rabbit trailing again. I spoke at the Oregon Counseling Association's annual conference recently.
Mhm.
And one of the things I said got an actual gap. Two things I said got actual gasps from the audience. And I'm so glad I have it recorded. I know, no pearl clutching, no pearl clutching, but close. The first was I said, I want you to know who's speaking to you right now. I am somebody who has 8 aces because that's doom from our perspective. And it's
Right.
very painful. I don't want to dismiss the
Mhm.
suffering that I and other people experience.
Mhm.
But oh my gosh, how can they be standing there with that many, right?
Uh-huh.
So that was fun and very
Yeah.
validating. I have to say, it was a little validating. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm sad.
Yeah. That right, I'm standing here
That's
despite
right.
those 8 aces.
That's right. And I also had graduated 3 times from therapy before I found a therapist to help me. No
Mm.
gasp there, but they didn't like that. But then the next piece is where I'm how I work and how I hope therapy goes, which is I said something like, you can increase intimacy with your clients.
Mm. And it's necessary. It's necessary.
It's the only thing that's healed me
Right.
is being known.
Absolutely. Yes. Right.
So
Yeah, sorry. I
no,
have so much
go,
to say
go,
about that.
go.
First, same to all of that, like all of those experiences, my personal experience has paralleled that as well in my journey. But the piece about oh my gosh, okay, I've lost it. Tell me what you just said.
That we need intimacy with our clients.
Yes, yes, because and this is part of why I really dislike this idea that we have to be professional and present professional and have these really rigid guidelines and boundaries for how we operate, because that actually impedes the process, the therapeutic process. We need to be able to be seen and heard and understood. Like that is a human need. And when we've experienced trauma, especially complex trauma and developmental trauma, or like racialized trauma, or like any of the traumas, really, when we've experienced trauma, it is really incredibly difficult to feel understood and to feel seen. And actually, not feeling seen or understood often leads to trauma symptoms. And we need to be able to, like, when we think about the healing process, we require human connection in order to have that healing process. Even if we just look at like the physiology of it, for a lot of us, we didn't get to experience that co-regulation that happens with what that we're supposed to get in the developmental process, where we connect with somebody who has the ability to regulate their nervous system. Um, and so we need that as adults. Like we didn't get that growing up. We still need that. And in order for somebody to feel safe, in order for somebody to feel connected and seen and understood, we have to have genuine, real human connection that is beyond what the professional standards allow us.
Maybe. I mean, I see your point. I see your point about professional standards, but I also think there are professional ethics that require that we treat our clients well. And
Mhm,
so it's possible to have intimacy with clients and be professional and adhere to professional ethics that are current, meaning
mhm,
within our system right now.
mhm,
So, for example, one way to talk about that is I do a lot of sharing of my own experience. I'm transparent with that, and I have ethics around it. I don't share stuff that I'm still working on because that
mhm,
puts a burden on somebody else, even if I'm not saying I need your
Mm-hmm.
help to do this, you can feel it, especially if you have
Uh-huh.
a neurodiverse population like me,
Uh-huh.
right? And
Yes, I
so,
agree. Mm-hmm.
right. And so I use my own self as a way to say, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, depending on the modality you're using, when things get more into your body and brain, we're doing top down and bottom up at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That's intimate. There's
Mm-hmm.
no getting around it because we're tracking every micro movement that is used. And that was the point I was making in this conference, is that if you start
Mm-hmm.
using a modality like we've talked about, EMDR, AIT, and for those of you who are new here, I'll put what that means down in the description below. But when we use those, or IFS, I know you like that.
Uh-huh. I love IFS.
Right.
IFS has been life-changing for me.
Yeah, it's a great system. When we
Mm-hmm.
use a system like that, automatically we get more intimate with our clients because we're present in the moment, and that's what
Mm.
intimacy really is. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Yes.
anyway, if
Yes.
you
And
if just I just want to say something to our audience real quick. If you
uh,
feel like your therapist is only talking about themselves or dumping on you, that's not what we're talking about.
no, no, not at all.
Right, because it's still your time and you're
Mm-hmm.
still the priority. So just to make that clear, what were you going to say?
I was just going to clarify some more about like many of the barriers that I think about when it comes to like the professional standard isn't actually what is like uh written specifically within the ethical guidelines. It's more about the expectations that like there's an expectation that there's no room for sharing personal experiences. Yet, so much of what helps my clients is me sharing how I've worked through the stuff in my own life and
Mm-hmm.
sharing how, like, I went through the process of realizing that experienced these traumas and how I overcame them. But also much of the like expectation of professionalism um I think actively prevents a lot of people from feeling safe
Yes.
um because they don't like, I know when I presented as more professional in the way that I was taught to, um many of my clients had no idea that I am somebody who is queer and somebody who understands what it's like to, go through the world and life on the outside. And um, a lot of, when it comes to like racial and ethnic minorities and queer folks and neurodivergent folks and all of this, like it's really important for people to like to know that I'm a safe person.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we've experienced societal oppression and harm, um, we don't trust anybody, especially those who don't present authentically.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody is presenting inauthentically to me, I know it right away,
Yep.
and it immediately said like my body goes, nope. Walls up, right? Like because I don't know that you're safe. And if I don't know if you're safe or not, I'm going to assume you're not.
And that's a good call considering our histories,
Hmm.
all the
Right.
histories that you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
Right. And if we look at the like evolution of the brain development and how it works, it makes sense that like if our brain doesn't know what is safe or not, it's going to automatically go back to those like instinctual responses of assuming that if you don't know, I'm gonna operate from a place that it's not safe. And then I'm gonna put up my defenses, and I'm gonna go into a fight or flight response, or I'm gonna go into a freeze response or a fawn response, um, and try to protect myself because experience has shown me the that this society isn't safe for me.
Mm-hmm. And we tend to frame that as if we're broken from the outside rather than
Mm-hmm.
our brains are doing a good human thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing the right thing with our brains,
Right, right.
right?
Our brain is doing what it was designed to do, which is to keep us alive, to keep us safe, to survive. And so like yeah, and that's one of the biggest things that I really don't like about diagnoses of mental illness is that like, nah, y'all are fine. Y'all like your brain is doing what it was designed to do. It is trying to protect you. The problem is not that your brain is broken or that there's something inherently wrong with you. The problem is that you live in a society that is really unsafe. And so your brain doesn't know when you can like relax and chill and rest and digest and, make human connections. Like it's just like we end up living life in a survival response rather than using those as like short-term survival mechanisms to get out of the immediate danger, because the immediate danger feels like it's everywhere.
And it was.
Mhm.
And still could be. I mean, you're right, because the immediate danger of societal stuff is everywhere.
Mhm.
And we're inoculated so that we don't even know that it's happening until we step back and study that. So, as I predicted, we are going to do a part two.
Okay.
And because there's so much to talk about here. And I mean, we probably could do a part 67,
Honestly.
maybe that'll happen. But I just wanted to end with a couple of things for this particular episode.
Okay.
And what I've heard so far is that we can have trauma experiences from multiple sources, and figuring out how to heal each different type of trauma is really important. So, for example, you may need to do trauma recovery work if you've had developmental trauma in your childhood or adolescence. You may
Mhm.
need to do current trauma and strategy planning if you're realizing you're neurotypical and you're not fitting in the society. That is a lot to unpack.
Mhm.
And so we're going to keep doing it. I also have heard you and I both say that, and I'm aware that I'm doing this as a neuroatypical thing. I'm kind of tangent. I'm right now real time showing you how I am monitoring you, the audience,
Uh-huh.
appearing before you, because I'm not supposed to do this when I really, really most of the time do this when I'm talking.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that is just a stressor on top of everything else.
Yeah, that self-monitoring and the
Yes.
constant like needing to keep track of what I'm doing or how I'm being read. Oh my gosh, that's exhausting.
It's really exhausting. And so, what I would like to talk about in our next part is how to start unpacking those things a little bit more. And I want
Okay.
to end, I'll ask you what you want to end on, but where I want to end is something we've both said, which is healing happens in relationship.
Mm.
Recovery happens in relationship. And I just
Mhm.
want to stress that it's relationship with people who are in your life. So we need to be mindful about who that is.
Mhm.
It's professionals that might be in your life, not just therapists, but other professionals can be discounting as well. And it's also relationship with self, right?
Yes.
And the
Mhm.
system as a whole. So that relational piece is crucial. And I just wanted to land there today and let our audience know that if you are looking for a therapist and you don't feel like you can relate to them when you're screening them, and you need to be screening, you absolutely need to interview more than one person, please. If you don't feel like they're going to be able to be authentic with you, that would be somebody I'd move to the back burner and keep looking, because there are people out there who can connect with you in the way you're looking for.
Mhm.
What would you add for our last tidbit on this particular episode?
I think the big piece for me, the big takeaway for me is uh it's so incredibly important to honor like who we are and where we're at, and to recognize that like trying to fit in and create belonging, like forcing a sense of belonging is not the way that to go. It's not helpful. It actually causes more harm. And that like if we if we're struggling in these ways, whether it's from trauma or neurodiversity, that it doesn't make you broken. And it doesn't mean that like your struggles are your fault, but rather that it's just really hard to live in a society that expects everyone to think and act and look and feel and behave the same way.
Mm-hmm. It's really hard for everybody, even what are being called neurotypicals now, whatever. I don't really believe in neurotypicality because I think we're all different, but that's another podcast. I love the way you said that. And so audience, we will see you for part 2, probably in the next release. And we're just going to pick up right where we're leaving off with this conversation. And I think that where that will lead us is down the road on how to figure out what relationships can support you and what that looks like, what to be looking for in those, and then maybe even a little more clarity on neurodivergence, because that just the process of realizing that could be true about you can be traumatic. And anyway, so we'll see you next time. Ace, thank you so much for being here and for being willing to continue the conversation.
I love it. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.